Hi guys, welcome back to the old mill shed. We'll be tuning the ignition timing on Emmett using a vacuum gauge, as well as how to troubleshoot an engine using one of these. Also, we will cover when your tractor is running but not very well, how you can diagnose the possible root cause off of the symptoms. So we're going to cover, 12, 13, it might be like 16 different ways you can use this gauge to diagnose your motor. Now I have drawn this gauge, a simplified version of this gauge, on our whiteboard to make it a little easier to see on video. If your engine is running normally, you've got it timed correctly, your piston rings are good, your valves are seating correctly, normal operating temperature, normal operating speed, you should be between 17 and 21 inches of mercury. If your engine is running normally by your first check and you are opening and closing your throttle rapidly, you will see the needle shoot up to about 25 and drop down to about 3 inches. And then when you come back to normal speed, it will settle back down in this range and the hand will be steady. This tells you that your rings are good, your valves are seating well, everything. That if you have that, your engine is properly timed and relatively good shape. If at operating temperature and operating speed and your hand is steady but it's down below the green range, say it's only around 15 or maybe even 12, means you have worn rings. If you repeat the check that you did on the normal reading, like we did on the normal reading where the hand would go to like 4 to maybe 30, and you're doing this, say you starting at around 12, 15, and you're advancing and opening and closing the throttle, and your needle is going all the way down to 0, that will confirm that you've probably got bad rings. If your needle is in a normal operating range and it drops about 4 divisions, more than likely you have a sticking valve. This happens a lot when your valve guides start to get worn, or maybe your spring has gotten a little weak to open and it can't overcome the friction to pick the valve back up. A burnt valve will look a lot like a sticking valve, with the exception you'll drop 4 more inches, but it will do it very, very regularly. Actually, every time that particular cylinder fires, you'll see this hand drop down and come back up. That is a burnt valve. A leaky valve, your hand will drop about 2 inches. And it might even still stay in the normal range. But this is the valve not sealing all the way. If your hand is vibrating, fluctuating back and forth between about 14 and 19, or 15 and 20, but it's doing it very, very fast, typically that means you have loose valve guides. With the motor racing, hand registers somewhere between 10 and 22, and you have really wide variations as your speed increases, that's weak valve springs. If your hand is reading somewhere between 8 and about 15, but it's steady, more than likely you have late valve timing. Now, if you have your rocker arms adjusted up too loose, besides with the ticking you're going to hear, that can contribute to this as well. If at normal operating speed and temperature, and your hand is very slowly going between 14 and 16, more than likely your plugs are gapped too close. If you're running a 12 volt machine, you really need to have them at around 35 to 40. If at normal operating speed and your hand is down here around 5 and 0, more than likely you have a leak in your intake, or more commonly, the little gasket between the carburetor and the intake is leaking. If your hand floats between 5 and around 19, typically is your head gasket, usually between 2 or more of the cylinders. If you get a high initial reading, I'd say 20 or above, and then the hand breaks back to 0 and then builds slowly back up to about 16, you've got a restriction in your exhaust. It could be a choked muffler. You could have had where squirrels or mice have built something in the exhaust. But definitely, if you see this, you want to shut that engine down as quickly as you can before you end up burning an exhaust valve. If your hand floats between about 13 and 17, more than likely your carb is out of adjustment. Now that we've done a quick review over what the gauge could be telling us, we're going to go out to Emmett, warm him up, and we're going to set the ignition timing using the gauge, and hopefully it will reaffirm that the engine is in good shape. Okay guys, so here's the setup. It's just to have a nipple that goes into the intake manifold, and the vacuum hose runs up to the gauge. On the picture it might look like, in the video it might look like it's laying up against the manifold. It's not. It's about 4 inches between it, and you want to make sure it doesn't lay up against anything hot. On this side I just take a piece of wire, in this case old brush, hook it on the hood and just hang it up out of the way. Normally I'll just lay it down in the toolbox, but I couldn't get a good view of it with the camera with it laying in there, so we just hung it up. And this is where we adjust the ignition timing. There's a screw right here that clamps and unclamps the outside of the distributor. This rotor button turns counterclockwise. So to advance timing, I turn the outside of the distributor clockwise. It gets that point to the rotor a little bit quicker. If I want to retard timing, I turn this counterclockwise. Okay guys, so as you can see, I would retard the timing just a little bit, then I would advance it back, and it would get up to about 21, touch over 21, and that's about where it likes to run, about as high as I've ever got it on this engine. You can see when I also go down to idle, you'll see that thing sit there and bounce around. That's because this is a very low compression engine, 6.5 to 1, and it's only 4 cylinders, so you're getting a little bit of a gap between each cylinder firing 90 degrees or 180 degrees between each cylinder firing, and it's just not creating enough to keep that vacuum steady. So it's already starting to fall off, but when the next cylinder fires, and it bumps it right back up. But at full throttle, and I was up very close to the governor. Actually, when I'd hit the governor, you would see the vacuum come down slightly. It's right around 21, which is right where you want it to be. It's steady. It's not dropping off. It's not dropping off and coming back up. It's not bouncing around. So that is what you want to see on one of these engines. So what happens if you've got your tractor tuned up, it's been running good, and all of a sudden it just starts acting kind of weird? You know, it's not all the time, or it starts showing some intermittent issues. Well, let's cover that. Number one, your tractor runs great for about a minute, then it cuts off, and then you let it cool off, you start it back up, it runs good for a minute, then it cuts off again. your points condenser is probably bad. Where your points condenser is going to be where you would find your points in your distributor. To get down to it, just pop both your clips, take your rotary button off, take your dust cover off, and it's right there. It's just a little screw, flathead screw that holds it on, and it runs around and screws in to your points. And what it does is when these points are closed, the electrical energy from the coil builds up in here, and when these points break, that little cam right there breaks that point, all that stored energy comes up through the rotor button and goes and jumps the gap in your plug. If you didn't have that condenser, you would not be able to jump the gap on your plug. Okay, well, it's not running for a minute and cutting off. It's running for about 3 or 4 minutes and cutting off. What's going on there? You forgot to turn your gas on. If it runs for about 5 minutes and cuts off, you let it sit, runs for 5 more minutes, cuts off, and your gas is turned on, that little screen up inside here could be clogged. Or it could be the filter on the side of the carburetor. And that would be this filter here. If it runs for about 15 minutes and then starts running rough or cuts off completely, more than likely that's going to be your ignition switch. If you suspect it's your ignition switch, run a jumper wire from down here where everything comes off and jumper over to the side next to the coil, or you can just jumper across right here. Now, do not leave that hooked up with the tractor not running, because you will burn up your coil, your points, your condenser, pretty much everything. What happens if it's running for 30 minutes and then it cuts off? You let it cool off and it starts back up again. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be your ignition coil. Now, these coils lay on their side. That's why I always suggest that you get an epoxy filled coil with an internal resistor. And if you go back to the video where we just do an overview on the tractor, there's actually a part number for this coil on here. If you don't leave your ignition coil, your ignition key on with the engine not running, and you have everything properly gapped, properly tuned, you should get 10, 15, 20 years out of these coils easy. So there's gas running out of my carburetor. What's up with that? So this carburetor has a float in here, and what this does, because this doesn't have a fuel pump. I guess all carburetors have a float, whether they have a fuel pump or not, but this one is all gravity fed from the fuel tank. And there's a little float in here that goes up and down with a little needle valve. When the gas level is at the correct height from the bottom, that float comes up and it closes the flow of gas off. And then as the engine pulls the gas from the bowl, the float will go down, open that needle valve up, and allow more gas to flow in. If that needle valve is not seating correctly, or say the float has a leak in it and there's gasoline inside of the floats, it will not allow it to come up. So it'll keep that needle valve open and allow gas to flow until it runs out of the carburetor. So I just put my engine back together and say just rebuilt the ignition or put new plug wires on it, new plugs. And all of a sudden you cannot get this thing to run correctly. Good chance is you've got your ignition out of order. And the proper ignition for a Ferguson is 1342. If you are on a Ford with the flatheads, it is 1243. Something else that could cause you issues as well is if you have cracked your intake or exhaust manifold. Now on this machine it's both the same casting. So if you have a crack in the exhaust side, you won't have to replace the intake side. And sorry guys, that's just the way these are designed. Another thing too, the bolts could have come loose, so you could be getting air in between the exhaust or intake manifold and the block. So you look for burn marks on the side of the engine block. You can use canned smoke with the engine running and just kind of spray around and see where it sucks the air in. Old guy taught me how to do this. I actually use a cigar. I don't feel comfortable with a lit cigar near gasoline vapors, but if you do, hey, that's on you. Last, and this is probably happens more than anything else, if your tractor's been running good and then over a period of time it's getting harder and harder and harder to crank, it's usually your carburetor's just getting dirty. You can, rebuild kits are cheap. Just pull it off, do a quick rebuild on it, clean it out good. If all the seals and everything in it look good, just get some carburetor cleaner, dip it in there, scrub it out, put it back together and put it back on the machine and adjust it up. That'll fix a lot. Okay guys, so that's the video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time under the shed.